Sir Peter Jackson's involvement in a film, as he was on this one as a co-writer and producer, will always get me to turn up to a cinema. He, after all, did direct my 3 favorite films of all time, as well as a handful of others that I really, really like a lot. He is just imaginative, extremely quirky, bold, and able to thoroughly entertain and transport me over and over again. And though I did walk in with some apprehension, that's certainly what I was hoping for from Mortal Engines, which was the first-time directorial effort from longtime PJ collaborator, Mr. Christian Rivers. And I can now kick things off by declaring with complete sincerity that I loved this film's production design and world. Like past PJ productions, it was just so bold and exciting, especially in its use of color, texture, and scale. In those aesthetics, it very intentionally, and I would say very rewardingly, bucked so much of what is popular in big-budget blockbusters these days. Though it achieved it often, photorealism wasn't Mortal Engine's primary focus, but rather visual freshness, grandeur, and bravado. And while some would call that bad, I would call it fresh, grand, and bombastic. Speaking of bombastic, I also need to give a shout out to actor Robert Sheehan. As little as that actor was given on the page or from his director, and he was indeed given barely anything, he thankfully was still able to quite effortlessly infuse so many of his scenes with at least the slightest spark of life and honesty. In a number of instances, I actually thought that he was the only thing saving the scene from turning into a complete dud. Unfortunately, not even Sheehan and his brilliance could save all of this film, which as a whole was, well, a dud. One of my primary thoughts throughout this entire film was just, this is exactly why directorial debuts should not be done on this scale. Of course, there are exceptions, directors who right out the gate on their very first production take on something mammoth and just crush it. But nonetheless, by and large, when there are so many variables, so many elements, and so many components, all of which need tended to and balanced just right, well, that's just a bad place for a new director to try and cut his teeth. To start with, a smaller independent production is itself full of ridiculous complications. Even if the director only has to be in command of 2 actors, a small crew, in one room, there are still so many things to think about, to work through, and to execute just right to make that first film a good film. But if you add on top of that a massive cast and crew, practical effects, visual effects, epic mythology, and truckloads of backstory, that first-time director is likely to drown. Honestly, I couldn't tell you if Christian Rivers is a bad director or not. He just wasn't dealt a hand that would allow me to assess that accurately. But what I did see, in addition to a lot of very green directorial mistakes, like just not getting the right read from an actor, not ensuring that the beats of a scene were playing correctly, not capturing a moment in an appropriate, much less effective way, Rivers also just time and again chose to make the most predictable choices visually and narratively. Repeatedly, I saw moments that were just so clearly ripped right out of other films in this genre, making what I thought anyways could have been quite fresh, quite old hat. But it wasn't even just that the scale of this film was wrong for Christian Rivers' directorial debut. The script was wrong, and by that I mean it was bad. The entire thing was basically comprised of either a character's expositing backstory, theirs or the world's, and fast action set piece after fast action set piece. Oh, and there was also the occasional moment of characters pensively staring at one another. That really was it. The script really contained barely any dynamics, no emotional ebb and flow, no narrative rise and fall. Nothing that could really help us settle into the story, or anything that could actually help us to know or care about these characters and their relationships with one another. The story fell flat, and the characters fell flatter. I really do hate having to give reviews like this. It kind of just breaks my heart, especially considering how much I love Peter Jackson and company down in New Zealand. But nonetheless, this just wasn't that great of a film, despite some of its visual grandeur. And for all these reasons, I will give the film a 2 out of 5. I would still love to know what you guys thought of the film, though, so definitely comment below and let me know. And finally, please do subscribe. I'm going to continue to review films and television on this channel, and I would love for you to stay up to date on all of those things. But for now, I'm Chris Hartwell. This is The Heartbeat. Thank you for joining me.